At my ex-husband's funeral, his sister stepped up to the microphone, smoothed the hem of her black dress, and cleared her throat like she was preparing for a courtroom speech. She didn't cry. She didn't even sound sad. She looked directly at me as she said, "He regretted ever meeting her. Told us all the time." A quiet gasp spread across the front pews. Then I saw it. His parents, his cousins, even his old football coach, they were all nodding, as if they had rehearsed this moment, as if those words were their truth. My stomach twisted. I sat frozen beside my son, Oliver. He was only 7. His legs didn't quite reach the floor, but I could feel the tension in his small body. He looked up at me, confused. I didn't know what to say. How do you protect a child from cruelty that's dressed up as grief? Rhea continued speaking, her voice louder now. He said she ruined him, that marrying her was the worst mistake of his life. Her words cut deep, but what stung more was the silence that followed. No one objected, not even the pastor. I felt a tear fall down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I wanted to speak. I wanted to stand and tell the truth, to say he wasn't always the victim, that I didn't deserve the things he did, or the way they were twisting everything now that he was gone. But what would that make me? The ex-wife attacking the dead? I stayed quiet. Not for them, for my son. And then, out of nowhere, Oliver stood up. He didn't look at me. He just reached into the small inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a USB stick on a red string. He walked straight to the podium like he had been preparing for this moment. He faced the room full of adults, lifted his chin, and said, "Aunt Rhea, Daddy gave me this video to play if anyone ever lied about Mommy." The church went completely silent. Not one cough, not a single chair creaked. Every person stared at him. This small boy with a trembling voice and a steady gaze. The pastor stepped forward to take the USB from Oliver's hand, and my heart pounded as the screen flickered to life behind him. And just like that, everything started to unravel. The morning of Daxton's funeral started with Oliver struggling to tie his shoelaces. He sat on the edge of my bed, swinging his legs while I knelt in front of him, looping the laces with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't want to go. I didn't want him to go. But he had looked me in the eye the night before and said, "I want to say goodbye to Daddy." I told myself it was about Oliver, that I would go for him, that I could stay quiet, stay in the back, be invisible. But I knew better. I knew the moment I stepped through the doors of that church, they would all be waiting. Daxton's family never accepted me. Not fully. Even when we were married, I was the outsider. Too opinionated. Too different. Not from the right kind of people. After the divorce, they stopped pretending altogether. They told mutual friends I poisoned Daxton's mind, turned Oliver against them, took everything and left him broken. I heard it all. I said nothing. I dressed Oliver in his little navy suit, the same one he wore to school pictures last fall. He looked too small for what was about to happen. I wore a plain black dress, pulled my hair back, and kept my face bare. I wasn't there to perform grief. I had already grieved, long before Daxton died. We arrived just before the service started. The church was small, sunlit through stained glass, with a white steeple that rose over the neighborhood like a watching eye. Inside, people whispered as we walked past them. Some stared, some looked away. I kept my hand on Oliver's back, steadying both of us. We sat 3 rows from the front. Rhea, Daxton's younger sister, sat in the front pew next to their parents, Marlene and Hugh. They didn't turn to look at us. They didn't acknowledge Oliver, their only grandson. That should have told me everything I needed to know. As the organ played its slow, aching notes, I stared at the closed casket. I tried to remember the last time Daxton and I had spoken without tension. Maybe it was years ago, maybe never. The love had vanished quietly, without a final argument or a door slamming shut. He became a ghost long before the accident. He stopped showing up. He missed birthdays, school events, holidays. Oliver still waited at the window every other weekend, still asked if maybe Daddy had to work late. I never gave him the truth. I told him maybe next time. I let Daxton be the hero in his mind because I couldn't take that away from him. When we separated, I asked for full custody, not out of revenge, but because Oliver needed consistency. Daxton didn't fight it. He barely responded. But months later, his family made it their mission to punish me for it, as if I had ripped their son from their arms. Now here we were, in the church they grew up in, surrounded by people who had already decided who the villain was. I could feel it in every glance. I could hear it in every quiet cough and turned shoulder. Oliver sat quietly beside me, swinging his legs again, not understanding the weight pressing down on the room. He leaned close to me. "Do you think Daddy's watching from heaven?" I looked at him and felt my throat tighten. "I think he would want to be here. I think he would want you to be okay." Oliver nodded. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did I. The pastor welcomed everyone and began with a prayer. A few distant relatives stood and shared soft memories. Daxton as a boy, Daxton playing guitar in college, Daxton always having a joke ready. No one mentioned his son. Not one person said his name. And then Rhea stood up. She walked to the front of the church with slow, careful steps. Her expression was calm, but her jaw was tight. She looked directly at me before she spoke. I already knew. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't going to be about mourning. This was going to be about blame. But I didn't leave. I didn't move. I sat completely still, knowing I had no voice here, no defense. All I could do was sit in that pew and pray that Oliver didn't believe a word she was about to say. He was just a child. But even he could feel the temperature shift in that church as the truth started to bend under the weight of lies. Rhea stood at the microphone like she had been waiting for this moment since the day I married her brother. She didn't glance down at notes. She didn't tremble or stammer. Her voice was clear, loud enough to reach the very back of the church. But she wasn't speaking to the crowd. She was speaking to me. "Daxton wasn't perfect," she said, "but he had a good heart. He made mistakes like we all do. But what hurt him the most, what truly broke him, was the person he trusted the most turning against him." The air in the room turned heavy. I could feel dozens of eyes sliding toward me, subtle and sharp. Rhea let the silence stretch, then kept going. He told me, again and again, that he regretted ever meeting her. He said he wished he had never fallen in love with someone who used his love against him, who twisted his son away from him, who made him feel worthless. I stayed completely still. My hands gripped the hem of my dress. I felt Oliver shift beside me. His small hand found mine. He didn't understand all the words, but he could feel something was wrong. I squeezed his hand once, gently, to tell him I was here, to keep myself from breaking. "I watched my brother fall apart," Rhea said, and while she smiled and moved on with her perfect life, he was left behind, blamed, forgotten, erased. No one interrupted. No one asked her to stop. The pastor stood silently, eyes lowered. Daxton's parents were nodding along with every word. I had been preparing for this. I knew someone might say something cruel, but not like this, not with this precision. This wasn't a passing insult or a bitter remark. This was a public execution of my character, disguised as a eulogy. She turned her gaze to the crowd. He deserved better. He deserved to be remembered for the good he gave, not the pain someone else caused him. And Oliver. She paused, voice suddenly softening. Oliver deserved to have a father who wasn't stolen from him. I felt the blood drain from my face. My son looked up at me, confused. "Mommy?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. My throat was tight. I wasn't afraid of Rhea's words, not really. I knew the truth, but I was afraid of what those words might plant in Oliver's heart. Seeds of doubt, of confusion. He was too young to carry this kind of pain. And yet here he was, sitting in a room full of people, pretending that love died only because of me. Rhea left the stage slowly, with the air of someone who had just won something. She walked back to the front pew and sat down next to her parents, who patted her arm like she had done something noble. The pastor stepped back up but hesitated. He looked around the room, then cleared his throat. "Would anyone else like to speak?" There was a long pause, the kind that makes every cough sound louder. I thought maybe a friend of Daxton's would step forward, or one of his co-workers, someone who might say something lighter, less cruel, something about his sense of humor or his old guitar. But no one moved. And then Oliver let go of my hand. He stood up without asking, without looking at me. I reached for him, but he had already stepped into the aisle, walking toward the front of the church with small but determined steps. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look nervous. He just moved. The room went still again. Whispering stopped. Even Rhea turned slightly, frowning. Oliver reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out something small, a red lanyard with a silver flash drive hanging from it. I had never seen it before. He clutched it tightly in his hand as he stepped up to the microphone, which was too tall for him. The pastor quickly lowered it to his height. Oliver's voice was soft but clear. "Aunt Rhea," he said, "Daddy gave me this video. He said if anybody ever lied about Mommy, I should play it." The silence was immediate and complete. Rhea's face twisted in confusion. The pastor stepped forward and gently took the USB from Oliver's hand. "Do you know what's on it, son?" he asked. Oliver nodded. "It's from Daddy. He said Mommy was scared to talk, so he wanted me to show this instead." My breath caught. My legs felt numb. I wanted to stop it. I didn't know what Daxton had said. I didn't know what my son was about to play in front of 100 people. But something in Oliver's face told me to trust him. He wasn't afraid. He looked proud. The pastor hesitated, then turned to the church's projectionist and handed him the USB. As the screen behind the pulpit flickered to life, I sat frozen in my seat. Oliver walked back to me and sat down quietly, still holding my hand. The sound of Daxton's voice filled the church a moment later, and in that moment, I realized the story they had been telling about me was about to change. The screen lit up with a shaky video. At first, all anyone could see was Daxton fumbling with the phone, adjusting the angle. His face appeared in the frame, illuminated by a single garage light. He looked tired. His beard was unshaven and his eyes were heavy, but his voice, when it finally came, was clear. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone." People shifted in their seats. The atmosphere in the church changed. No one looked at me now. Every pair of eyes was glued to the screen. "I want this to be played only if certain people start twisting the story," he said, "and I know they will. So let me say something I should have said a long time ago." I gripped Oliver's hand. My pulse thudded in my ears. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a deep ache of something I hadn't felt in years, fear and hope battling for space. Daxton looked into the camera. I lied. For years, I told my family that Marin destroyed me, that she kept me from my son, that she was the reason I lost everything, but that wasn't the truth, not even close. A sharp inhale came from somewhere behind me. Rhea didn't move. She begged me to be a father. She gave me every chance. I was the one who walked away. I was the one who didn't show up. When I missed Oliver's birthday, it wasn't because she didn't tell me. It was because I couldn't handle showing up and seeing how well she was raising him without me. My throat tightened. I kept my eyes on the screen, but my mind was racing through every fight, every silent car ride, every time I sat across from him during our final year together and begged him to talk to me. I blamed her because it was easier than admitting I failed, he continued. I blamed her because my parents needed someone to hate, and I was too much of a coward to take responsibility. The camera wobbled slightly as he reached for something off-screen. When he leaned back, his voice dropped to a quieter tone. "To my family, especially Rhea, I know you think you're protecting me, but you've done more harm than good. Marin never tried to take Oliver away from me. She protected him from my inconsistency, from my drinking, from the disappointment I brought to every visit." People in the room began to murmur. I felt the shift in the air, like something long frozen was finally breaking open. "I want this to be clear," Daxton said. "I loved Marin, I just didn't know how to love her right. And I loved Oliver more than anything, but I was never strong enough to prove it. So if you're sitting in that church right now thinking she destroyed me, stop. I did that to myself." The screen faded to black. Silence fell again. It wasn't like before. It wasn't filled with judgment or shame. This silence was heavier, honest. People didn't know where to look. Some stared at the floor. A few looked at me, but their expressions had changed. There was no longer disgust or blame. There was something else. Uncertainty. Maybe even guilt. Oliver turned to me. "Was that okay, Mommy?" I nodded, pulling him into my arms. That was more than okay. The pastor stepped forward slowly, unsure of what to say. He cleared his throat, offered a brief prayer, and closed the service. No one else came to the podium. No one spoke about how much Daxton regretted his marriage. No one said a word about what a terrible wife I had been, because now they couldn't. We walked down the aisle together, Oliver and I side by side. No one tried to stop us. No one whispered as we passed. Rhea sat in the front row, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring straight ahead. Her face was unreadable. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. The air smelled like fresh rain on pavement. Oliver tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy made that video just for you," he said. "He wanted people to know the truth." I looked down at him and smiled. He did it for both of us. There was nothing triumphant about the moment. It didn't erase the years of pain, the missed birthdays, the court hearings, the quiet nights when I cried in the dark and wondered how I became the villain in someone else's story. But it mattered. It shifted something. It gave Oliver something I never expected, clarity. And it gave me something I didn't even know I needed, vindication. That night, I sat at the edge of his bed as he curled up under the blankets. "Are you sad?" he asked. "A little," I admitted, "but I'm okay." He thought for a second. "I think Daddy's okay now, too." I kissed his forehead. "I think so, too." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's version of my story. I had my own, and now, so did he. After the service ended, most people walked out quietly. Some stopped to glance at me, unsure of what to say. A few offered soft nods, the kind that carry a weight they don't have the courage to put into words. No one said, "I'm sorry." No one said, "You were right." But I didn't need them to. The silence said enough. Outside, families gathered in small groups by their cars. The usual polite funeral chatter, memories, condolences, plans for lunch, was gone. People were shaken. The video had knocked the wind out of whatever false narrative had been built around my name. I didn't expect an apology. I only wanted space to breathe. Oliver held my hand tightly as we walked down the steps. He had done something so brave, so pure, that I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind. The way he stood up, the way his voice didn't shake, the way he carried the truth when I couldn't. He was only 7, but he had protected me more fiercely than any adult ever had. As we reached the sidewalk, I heard someone call my name. I turned and saw Marlene, Daxton's mother, walking toward us. Her heels clicked against the pavement, but her face wasn't as sharp as it used to be. She looked tired, older than she had a week ago, maybe older than she ever let herself admit. She stopped a few feet away, not close enough to seem warm, but not far enough to ignore. She looked at Oliver first. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for showing the video." Oliver blinked. "Daddy told me to." Marlene nodded, her voice lowered. He was right to. It was the truth. I said nothing. I waited. She finally looked at me. I believed everything he told us. I wanted to. It made things easier. If you were the reason he was unhappy, then I didn't have to look at the ways we failed him. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't cry. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I know what I let happen. I saw how he pulled away from you and Oliver, and I didn't stop it. I didn't ask questions. I just repeated his version of events until it became the one I wanted to believe." Oliver squeezed my hand again. He didn't understand all of it, but he could sense the shift. This wasn't the woman who used to glare at me from across the courtroom or send birthday cards to Oliver, addressed only to herself and Daxton. This was someone else, someone finally looking at the truth and choosing not to run from it. I gave her a single nod. Not because everything was forgiven, but because something inside me let go of the need to keep carrying it. She turned back toward the church, shoulders hunched slightly, and disappeared into the crowd. We got into the car. I buckled Oliver in, then sat behind the wheel for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I expected to feel anger or vindication, or maybe even satisfaction. But what I felt was something else. Relief. Not because the past was erased, but because the lie that followed me for years was finally broken. On the drive home, Oliver stared out the window. "Mommy?" "Yes?" "Why didn't you tell me the truth before?" I glanced at him in the mirror. His face was calm, curious, not hurt. "Because I wanted you to love your father without feeling confused," I said. I didn't want you to think love and pain had to come together. I wanted you to remember the parts that felt good." He was quiet for a few seconds. "I think Daddy tried to fix it." I nodded. "He did, and you helped him." That night, after Oliver was asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed the video one last time. Not for closure, not out of bitterness, but because I needed to hear it again with a quiet heart. I needed to know that I hadn't imagined it. Daxton's voice played clearly. His face, tired but sincere, filled the screen. "I hope Oliver knows I loved him. I hope Marin knows I was wrong." I closed the laptop and let the weight slide off my shoulders. This wasn't the ending I expected. I had spent years building walls to protect myself from judgment, gossip, and the ache of being misunderstood. But what broke through those walls wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge. It was a child's honesty and a man's final confession. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The next morning, Oliver asked if we could visit the park, not because it was a special day, just because the sun was out. He wanted to fly his kite. We stood in the open field, watching the kite dance in the wind. He ran ahead of me, laughing as it lifted higher. I watched him with a full heart, knowing he was growing up with a truth that wasn't twisted by bitterness or blame. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of who I was in someone else's story. I had my truth, and now the world did too. Weeks passed, but people were still talking about the funeral. Not in hushed gossip like I had feared, but in quiet reflection. The story they had once accepted without question had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes by a little boy with a flash drive and the courage to speak. The narrative shifted not because I defended myself, but because Daxton finally told the truth, and because Oliver believed in it enough to carry it. Life didn't magically improve overnight. I still passed people in the grocery store who had once whispered behind my back. Some smiled now, others avoided my eyes. But I no longer carried the same weight. The burden of constantly trying to prove I wasn't what they thought of me had lifted. Oliver was lighter too. He didn't bring up the funeral often, but when he did, he spoke of it with peace, not confusion or sadness. He had known his father in pieces, short visits, scattered gifts, long silences. That day had given him something more complete, a final message, an honest one. One afternoon, I sat on the porch while Oliver played in the yard. He was flying the same red and blue kite we brought to the park. The wind caught it just right, lifting it into the sky. He ran and laughed, calling out for me to watch. I smiled and waved, but my mind drifted back to everything that had led to this moment. The years I had spent shrinking myself to avoid giving anyone more ammunition. The times I cried behind closed doors, so Oliver would never feel responsible for my pain. The court hearings, the lonely holidays, the birthday candles I helped him blow out while telling him maybe Daddy would call later. I thought about the silence that followed every lie told about me. I had waited so long for someone to speak up for me. In the end, it wasn't a judge or a friend or even Daxton while he was alive. It was my son, 7 years old and braver than anyone expected. That truth gave me room to stop hiding, not just from others, but from myself. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail from Ria. It was handwritten on thick, folded paper. The first lines were defensive. She didn't apologize exactly, but she admitted she had believed what was easiest. She wrote that she never thought Daxton would lie like that she had wanted someone to blame because it hurt too much to blame him. Toward the end of the letter, she wrote one sentence that stayed with me. "The hardest thing to accept is that I was cruel to the only person who never fought back." I didn't write her back. I didn't feel the need to. Some things don't need a reply. Some truths are enough on their own. That Sunday, Oliver and I visited the cemetery. It was his idea. He brought a small drawing he had made, just stick figures of the three of us holding hands, with the word forgiveness written across the top in green crayon. He placed it gently at the base of the headstone and stood there for a while, silent. When we left, he looked up at me. "Daddy really loved you," he said. I knelt beside him. "He did, he just didn't know how to show it." "I think he tried," he said, at the end. I nodded. "He did the best he could, and you helped him." That night, I finally opened the photo album I had kept hidden in the back of my closet. It was from the early years. Smiling pictures from the hospital after Oliver was born, a blurry shot of Daxton holding him in the backyard, a vacation photo none of us remembered taking but still had framed for a while. I let myself remember the parts that weren't painful, not to rewrite the past, but to stop letting it define me. Pain doesn't disappear, but it doesn't have to live at the center of your story. This chapter of my life had always felt like something unresolved, a wound that kept opening every time someone repeated his side of it. But now, it had been rewritten by truth, spoken not by me, but by the two people who had once failed me the most, Daxton and his family, and most of all by the person I loved most, my son. If there's one thing I hope people take from this, it's that silence may protect your pride, but truth protects the people you love. Daxton waited too long to speak his truth, but he still chose to leave something behind that mattered. In doing so, he gave Oliver the power to defend what was right. And me? I learned that sometimes the loudest form of strength is the one that stands up quietly when no one else will. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, or silenced by people who twisted your truth, know this: your story is still yours to tell, and someday someone might speak for you when you need it most. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below if you've lived through something similar, and don't forget to like and subscribe. We tell the stories that others try to bury, because your voice deserves to be heard.